Thanks very much, Livy, and welcome everybody. Good morning to everybody to the second in our series of 3 joint webinars with HSBC and Business West. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ian Larrard. I work for Business West. I'm the director for Business West in Swindon and Wiltshire, and an ex-HSBC employee as well. Again, for those of you that don't know me, Business West is one of the largest chambers of commerce in the country. We work with about 24,000 businesses across the southwest, employing about 230 staff, and delivering public sector contracts, as we term them, for example, with Department for International Trade and Innovate UK. And as one of the largest business representative organisations in the country, we're delighted to be working with partners such as HSBC in delivering this short series, which we've titled, and it's a bit twee now because everybody's titling this, but Building Back Better. And the first in the series, some of you may have been on the webinar with Mark Beresford-Smith, who's the head of economics with commercial banking at HSBC, who was talking very positively about the future growth of our economy. Today we welcome Roland Emmans, head of technology at HSBC, who will assess the role of technology and innovation in driving business evolution, and most importantly, our survival throughout the pandemic and beyond. And just a name check for the third in the series, which is on the 17th of June, we'll have Robert King, who is head of sustainable finance at HSBC UK. And Robert's going to highlight some how sustainable practices can save businesses money by driving energy and cost efficiencies, innovation and waste reduction. And additionally, he'll talk, I think, about some of the green financing offerings that are available. But back to today, and to Roland Emmans, who several of you may have heard speak previously. Technology has come to the fore in the last 14 months, and it's obviously here to stay. Who would really use Teams and Zoom 14 months ago? I know I'd hardly use them, and now we can't do without them. And in fact, I was reading only yesterday that it's so much part of our everyday world that various businesses, including HSBC, are considering joining others like Citigroup, where they will have a Zoom-free, meeting-free Friday afternoon, which is probably no bad thing because a lot of us are zoomed out completely. So, but it shows how far we've come along. I'm sure Roland's going to cover a lot of these things and many more in the innovation and technology world in general. Please have your questions ready. Put them in the chat function for when Roland's finished his presentation. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over, because I think Tom is with us. Yep. To Tom Lloyd-Jones, who's Deputy Head of Corporate Banking for HSBC in the Southwest, to say a few words and to formally introduce Roland. Over to you, Tom.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you all for joining. And welcome, Roland. I think the Southwest is an incredibly strong tech hub outside of London, and we've worked with Roland and his team in recent years as a number of customers, businesses have evolved and grown. But I think what's also really interesting is what we've seen during COVID and during the pandemic is more traditional businesses and how they have evolved their business model to embrace tech, be that very traditional retailers embracing e-commerce, be it what we've done as HSBC. We did our first transaction in our Southwest team during COVID almost virtually. We didn't meet the client, we signed all the documents virtually. It was all driven by technology and changes and innovation. And I think if someone had said to that to us 2 years ago, we'd have said they were living on the moon. I think the pace of change and how things have evolved has been fascinating. And I think how businesses capture that opportunity, looking at productivity gains, other things relating to technology as we come out of COVID is going to be a fascinating subject. Roland's really passionate about this topic. I've heard him speak a number of times, and I think for us, we really would like that engagement. So please do ask any questions you've got, because I think it's a really broad-ranging and really interesting topic. But I'll pass over to Roland now, and thank you very much for giving us your time.
Fantastic. Good morning. Thank you very much. Hopefully I'm going to pop up on the middle of the screen. Right now, Tom's gone on mute. Hopefully you can all hear me. Yeah, right. I'm going to share some slides today. What I'm going to do is I'm mainly going to talk through some big picture things. I'm going to talk through some of the stuff that clients are talking to me about. So I head our tech sector HSBC. What does this mean? That basically means I spend a lot of time working with technology clients, helping them as they're on their growth journey. The sort of topics I'm going to talk about today are an amalgamation of over 400 conversations with UK and international tech leaders. So if I share my screen, hopefully technology will work. Let's go with that one and share it. Right. So I'm looking. It's quite fun for me because I love doing these webinars because effectively I'm talking to myself in a cupboard. So hopefully I'll engage with you and get to talk about stuff that's interesting for you all. So if we look at what's happened in the last 24 months, we've had a period of change like no other. We've gone from the traditional sense where we used to meet people, we used to go to offices, we used to go out. As has already been talked about, we've moved to a position where actually now our cities are vacant, our offices are vacant, and we're all spending much of our lives at home on this stuff, juggling multiple conflicting, competing priorities. You know, I know, for example, I've helped my mother-in-law who lives up in Scotland set up video conferencing so that she can engage with the family. That was all quite fun doing remotely. One of my cats likes coming and sitting up on my desk when I'm working, and periodically people will hear the joys of my daughter's violin practice or her trumpet practice, or my son coming and asking me about Fortnite. And these are all things that happen for everybody. We've got a different perspective, a different view into people's lives during lockdown. So I'm saying that as a bit of a background to what I'm going to talk about. So this is some stuff I've been talking about for a while, but it's been updated post-COVID. It's very much talking about how technology is reinventing the world, or rather how we are reinventing the world with technology. I talk about gales of change. So I've got a couple of hobbies and I spend quite a lot of time out in the water. So I do a bit of sailing, dinghy racing on the Solent, and I'm a powerboat instructor. So I use the analogy of gales of change. So is your business and are you personally like this great shipping line here, happily trucking along on nice calm seas, carrying a whole load of load, making great progress and everything's going fine? Or are things a little bit more complicated? You're getting hit by the side from a few waves, you're getting a bit knocked off course, or have things gone properly wrong and you don't really know what's going on? Well, what I'm going to try and talk about now for the next sort of 15-20 minutes is some of the themes that are potentially driving businesses in different directions that are very different to historically. Probably the number one common ground that clients are talking to me about is they're really certain that what's got them here historically from their business and personally are not the skills and the product offering and the business that they're going to need to create for the future. So we're at a bit of an inflection point. Maybe not such an inflection point as the Ever Given, and maybe not stuck across a canal, but we're using this as an analogy. We all get stuck in our own ways and these forces are going to act on us. So what I'm going to now try and do is talk through some of these forces. So if we look at what I describe as, okay, so before we go into that, actually, let me just cover one area. So we live in a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So this VUCA concept came out of the military in the late 1970s and was really picked up by business in the mid 2000s. And it fully represents the world we live in. The world is incredibly volatile. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. It's highly uncertain. The way things interact are highly complex. Who would have thought that there'd be a shortage of chips, of silicon chips at the moment because of electricity and power and weather outages in Texas, some flooding in Asia, and global supply chain issues around the automotive sector. We live in a world that's ambiguous. It's no longer black and white. So on that background, we're now going to talk through 8 gales of change. So if we start with society is changing. So I love my Lego characters, not just because I'm a big kid, but also because I think they give you a great view on, you've got lots of different tribes. You've got 5 generations in the workforce. You've got a stratification of society. You've got the creation of clans. Social media is increasingly driving this. We get this increasingly myopic view of the world because social media just wants you to spend more time on their platform so they can serve you more ads. And therefore, if you start looking at something, that'll keep taking you down that rabbit hole. And then you've got the slight fun of this little character, where the working from home genie is out of the bottle. I know a number of people in my firm and broadly across the industry who thought that If you couldn't see your staff, they were out on the golf course skiving, or they were sitting at home watching daytime TV. I think it's been clearly proven that working from home, whilst it has some challenges around collaboration, around mental well-being, productivity is substantially ahead of what it would be in an office. And I think that therefore leads to some interesting questions going forwards about, okay, how do we spend time collaborating, and how do we spend time creating output as individual contributors? So if you look at what some of this society change is meaning, or some of the other things that are going on, you end up with this position where you're getting an evolution of the establishment. The amount of time that firms are spending in the Fortune 500 has reduced over time and is actually shortening further at the moment. It's easier for businesses that are digitally native, that don't have a huge amount of infrastructure or legacy, to just pop up and reinvent themselves. So that's leading to three changes for businesses that are incumbents. And it doesn't just mean large businesses. This means businesses of every type that are existing, are out there operating in their market today. Certainly large firms are divesting, and they're looking very long and hard about, what is the key thing I do? What is my raison d'etre? Why am I here? What is my reason to exist? And that's leading to a couple of things. One, an investment in the core areas about the business and what the business does, and two, an area of innovation. And everybody's doing this. And this innovation is driven by some of those changes of society we talked about, as well as a load of tech changes that I'm going to talk about. But if you then move on, so digital transformation, and I'm conscious this is a bit of a fire hose, but digital transformation is a beautiful term that's used to cover a whole area of things. So, and it doesn't only relate to small firms, it relates to firms of every size, be it an HSBC where we're going through a digital transformation and we're moving ourselves from rigid, old, legacy, on-premise in a data center systems to cloud native, mobile first, highly scalable and highly tweakable by the users to achieve their own personal experience. But that doesn't only happen for big firms like us, it could be for small firms. So a friend of mine runs a 12-person building firm, and his office staff were getting so sick of being given soggy bits of paper with all the guys' timesheets on a Friday afternoon that they ended up implementing a very simple mobile phone app that geolocates the guys when they arrive on site. So you know they're clocking in for the hours they're working, where they're working. They can be messaged by the team if they've got to go and do something else during the day. All of their working hours go straight to the cloud at the end of the day when they log off, and then the team in the office just produce a timesheet that goes straight into the payment system, into the accounting system. That's a classic example of digital transformation, but too many people think of digital transformation as a big ugly thing that only happens with large firms. So if we look at the graphic, effectively this is saying there's three parts of digital transformation. People tend to focus on the technology side because it's the one that's well, relatively easy to do. Even then, it can still be very, very hard. So you get process change. Often people try and ram new technology down old process, or old process down new technology. And that's one of the reasons why technology implementation can fail, or they completely forget about culture. Human beings we're all really bright, really clever people. We will find ways around things. If somebody says to me, you need to use this new bit of technology, if I don't understand why, the purpose, the benefit, what's in it for me or what's in it for the firm, I'm probably not going to use it, especially if it makes my life harder. If it makes my life simpler, yeah, that's a different story. However, digital transformation is ripe for failure. 70% of all digital transformation programs fail. They fail to achieve half of their desired benefits. That's quite scary when firms are spending a lot of money on it. And why do they fail? Well, they fail because they only change the tech, they forget about the process, and they forget about the culture. So actually, one of the bits of kind of guidance I want to give to everybody on this call, if you're doing any sort of technology change, whether it's a simple or a complex, make sure you change the process and make sure you take the people along with you and make sure they understand what's in it and why. And this reference to digital transformation 2.0 is because we're seeing a whole new push on it now, and we're seeing it meaning new things post-COVID. We're seeing a much greater willingness, and in fact a demand from consumers and from employees to accept change and to drive change. So what does that actually mean, or kind of what does all that mean? Well, pretty much every 100 years historically we've had an industrial revolution. The last one, the third industrial revolution, was in the 1970s, so that's only 50 odd years ago. But now I believe we're living through the fourth industrial revolution. So what does the fourth industrial revolution mean? It effectively means you're at a position where it's no longer, the decisions are no longer being made by the human beings. The data and the machines and the devices are making the decisions themselves in a fully or semi-autonomous way. A classic example of looking at this is, instead of us driving a car, it will be driving itself, and we will be sitting there in the back doing something else. If you then we'll take a pivot in a slightly different direction for a minute. If you use a historic view, so I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to spend a little bit of time with Lord William Hague, ex-leader of the Conservative Party, and he's a classic avid historian, and he talks about how history will look back on any period of time. I thought, okay, that's interesting. So I've sort of stolen some of the stuff that he said. He said history will look back on the end of the 20th, early 21st century as three things. One, the end of the Cold War, fairly seismic shift in the way the world worked. Two, the rise of the East, again, pretty fundamental change in how things happen, moving from being just a production center to being the rise of the middle class, huge amount of wealth, huge political power as well. And then he sort of stopped and said, data, the new force. I was like, okay, that's interesting. I've then adopted this to say, well, I think the world will look back and say, well, COVID-19 was a seismic shift. It was a global pandemic, plague, if you like. And that has led to a load of other changes or acceleration of existing trends that were out there. Because a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about today, these are not new trends. These are trends that have been bubbling up if you know where to look, but they've just been really accelerated through due to COVID. And if we go on and look about some of these trends that are actually accelerating, there's a load of things here, and they don't act in isolation. You've got mobile phones, the supercomputer for our pocket or the remote control of our lives. Increasingly, mobile phones basically run our lives. They will do all of our shopping, they will do a lot of our admin, they will do, you name it, and they're only used actually to make calls for a very, very small percentage of the time. So actually they're much more now a supercomputer than just a mobile phone. And you've got the arrival of 5G, which is just coming in the UK and just rolling out in the UK. That's going to fundamentally turbocharge, supercharge the amount of compute power and the speed that internet connected devices, IoT devices, and mobile phones can achieve and can use. And that's going to allow acceleration of the automated vehicles, acceleration of no end of things that we haven't even thought about, because effectively they will have the equivalent, any mobile device will have the equivalent of super fast broadband directly wirelessly to them. We talked a little bit about social, about how the world is changing, how people are using it much more. It's increasingly my myopic view. There's a little bit of stuff I'm going to do on social in a few minutes time. The Internet of Things, I think, is one of the biggest changes, or IoT and devices, one of the biggest changes that is going to impact firms across all sorts of industries in a post-COVID world. If you think about the logic and the cost of it, if I have to go and send an engineer, if I run an engineering business of some description, let's say a lift servicing business, if I have to send an engineer to a customer site, that costs me broadly £100 before they start doing anything that I'm going to have to charge onto the customer in some way, shape, or form. If I could have sensors on the lift that say, this is the number of times the lift has been up and down and it gets serviced every 10,000. This is the amount of heat the motors are using. This is the amount of strain on the wires. If things start going out of normal range, I can proactively put in an intervention that means people don't get stuck in the lift. That means the lift isn't out of service at the time it wants to be. And also that doesn't mean I don't need to go and put people in just to service a lift when it doesn't need servicing and bring them into an environment potentially introducing COVID or any other risks where they don't need to be. So that whole Internet of Things, the ability to track, remotely monitor things is hugely beneficial. And I think we're going to see a lot of change around that. We're seeing early stages in that with vehicle telematics, vehicle tracking. We're seeing some parts of this with food tracking. We're seeing some sorts of this with device tracking parcels when they're being sent around. But I think there's a huge amount of growth opportunities coming through that. And then if you move further on and we start talking about cloud, cloud computing allows us all to access almost infinite power in a remote way. We in the old days, if you go back to 1970s, big firms like us, we had mainframes, we had lots of power compute power, and we had dummy terminals on our desktops. We're almost going full circle back to that, where the compute is in the cloud, the storage is in the cloud, it's infinite, it's almost free. And then that cloud storage allows you to get huge amounts of data, unstructured data, and crunch it and get insights from it. And I guess the final thing I just wanted to talk about here is around the number of connected devices. So globally, there are nearly 4 times as many connected devices. A lot of those are Internet of Things devices, but equally a lot of them are mobile devices than there are people on the planet. That's quite a scary stat. That's quite interesting. So if we then look, these things are all interconnected. No one of those could survive without the others. And that's a key feature. If any one of these technologies had arrived in isolation, they wouldn't be driving the change. And probably these 5 as a group are the biggest factor of change that's going on outside of societal change. So if we then look at, I talked about data a little bit earlier on. So data is one of these things. It's compared to the new oil, but I think it's compared to the new oil intentionally as a two-way thing. So oil is really good. It can help grease things. It can help lubricate. It can help things function. An oil slick in Alaska can be really, really bad. And I think data has got exactly that same potential. If you're not careful, you don't know how you use it, you don't look after it in the right way, if you have a cyber breach and you lose a load of data, or you use it for inadvertently the wrong purposes, it's a real problem. I mean, the amount of money that's talked about being spent on machine learning and artificial intelligence this year is heading towards $60 billion globally. And that's nearly twice as much as was spent 3 years ago. So you can see it's on this exponential growth curve. So let's talk a little bit about what data is, and let's talk about the value transaction. So I'm sure we all use Google as a search engine or a similar search engine. Every time I type something into Google, it's a value transaction. I'm sharing my data, I'm allowing them to serve ads on me, and I'm getting an output that I want. I'm fine with that because I get the search result that I want. And on occasions, maybe not as often as Google Lite, I actually get served ads that I think are interesting. It gets more interesting when you look at who owns the data and how is the data used. So there's quite a lot of fuss about whether the UK COVID app was doing what it should have been doing, or whether it was breaking rules, and whether that was intentional or unintentional. I suspect it was probably unintentional and people just trying to roll it out really quickly. But then you get the changes that Apple's recently brought in. There's a huge amount of noise at the moment around mobile marketing. And there's a stat that came out over the weekend that said only 3% of customers on iOS 14 in the US have accepted the ability to share data. So what iOS 14 and Apple have done is they've effectively put privacy blockers in. So if any of the apps on my phone want to use my data when I'm not using that app, so effectively harvest data across other things, then I need to give it explicit permission, whereas previously through cookies and through the way it was all worked, it was effectively an implicit permission. And that's a big change for the global marketing industry. They will find ways around it. They have ways around it, but it's a transition of value, and it's making consumers more aware of how valuable their data is. But data goes further than this. If I told you there was about 2,000 acres of farmland in the UK that has been farmed for 2.5, nearly 3 years now, without a human being engaging with the land, I don't know whether you'd be surprised or not. So James Dyson's got a massive farm up in the middle of Lincolnshire where these things happen. This was the first place in the UK where there were truly autonomous vehicles. If they get it wrong, they end up in a ditch. The drone stuff there, a mate of mine works in a drone survey, field survey business. And this is more mainstream now, where they go and survey the fields using all sorts of photos, all sorts of cameras, infrared spectrum, you name it. And they then come up with a heat map across the field that says this part of the field needs potassium, this part of the field needs nitrogen, and allows you to do differential crop spraying of nutrients and insecticides, such that the field only gets what it needs in the place it needs it. And that's a fantastic thing from a sort of sustainability and environmental protection. And also from the input side, because farming inputs are expensive. You don't want to put unnecessary ones on the land that are going to run off and cause you environmental issues. You actually want to put on what's going to benefit your crop. And that, I think, is a big change. When you get an industry like farming that is considered by many people to be relatively stable, embracing this sort of technology at a high speed, it tells you something that there is some fundamental change going on. So let's talk a little bit about the downside. So I don't know if anybody's a Cardiff City fan. It's not a million miles away, I guess, across the bridge. Cardiff City and the Police Force of Wales did a facial recognition trial at a Cardiff City game about 2 years ago now. And they put in, I think, the 100 most wanted criminals in Cardiff. They put in their faces. They had some success. I think they got 3 of them. Unfortunately, they ended up with about 300 false positives as well. So the technology isn't perfect. They ended up going and having conversations and getting quite close to arresting people who the technology has flagged were effectively the same as the people on their list from the facial recognition, but it just wasn't there. This technology is moving at a pace and it is getting better all the time, but people are still having to really think about, how do I use things like facial recognition? How do I use AI? How do I use big data? And one thing, just a sort of final thing to flag around this, I don't know if anybody's bought a car recently. I don't know if you have realized that you will have shared, if you bought a brand new vehicle from any of the major manufacturers, you will have signed a data sharing contract. So I bought Discovery Sport a few years ago, and I actually went and looked at it, and I found it in the paperwork when I bought the car. It said, yes, I agree to share all my data with Land Rover. It's all wrapped up around the tracking, but it's also around the vehicle telematics, the ability to remotely manage the vehicle. But if I were to have had an accident and it had been serious enough, the police have the ability to go and look at that data and to say, oh, well, actually, Mr. Emmans, you were driving like a bit of a tit beforehand. So actually, it's your fault you had that accident, not the car's. So it's just sort of that's the thing I'm flagging up as in, there's all this unexpected data that's flying around that people aren't even thinking about. So let's move on to talk about some stuff that's much closer to all of our hearts, health. And I'm going to talk about augmentation, and I'm going to try and balance this up now. So this works much better on an interactive basis. So try and guess a number in your head if you'd be so kind. So if I said to you, general practitioners, GPs, only get a relatively small percentage of their first diagnoses right, you might be surprised about that. So on average, they get somewhere between 55 and 63% of first diagnoses right of a patient presenting to them. In the US, IBM Watson, couldn't find a picture for IBM Watson, so I used the Amazon Alexa. It's the same thing. IBM Watson's got a medical license. It uses natural language processing, so it listens to a conversation, or it can have a conversation with a patient, and it was getting stuff right about 30% of the time on its own. If you stick these two things together, you end up with quite a phenomenal position where somewhere between 90 and 97% first diagnosis accuracy. So if you think what that means to us as human beings, if I'm going to go and present and my GP is going to get it wrong 40+% of the time, that means I'm potentially taking drugs I don't need to get. I'm poorly for longer than I need to be. I'm costing the NHS money. I'm probably got to go and see the doctor more than once. There's a lot of societal bads there and personal bads. If you then stick a chatbot, sorry, not a chatbot, if you go and stick an artificial intelligence engine and let the GP have the conversation with the patient, and the artificial intelligence engine then listens, the GP effectively gets all the obvious stuff. I feel like I've got flu. Okay, well, you had a temperature, you got a headache. Yeah. Right. Well, maybe you've just got flu. The artificial intelligence engine then effectively prods the GP and says, yes, but the patient said they've just come back from East Africa. So actually they might have these 5 other rarer diseases. Go and ask them these sort of questions. And that combination is incredibly, incredibly powerful. We are seeing early signs of that sort of adoption through COVID. And there is a huge amount of spend going on at the moment around NHS X and the digital transformation of the NHS. Lots of jokes around 15 years worth of digital transformation in the NHS in the last 15 weeks. But these sort of changes go beyond just the healthcare. So if we look at the supermarket, something hopefully we can all relate to. One of the questions that people often ask is, why do we not have robots stacking shelves? Because they can do it and they're cheap. Well, the reason we don't have robots stacking shelves is because we as consumers aren't willing to accept it. There was some research done in the US where they had some robot shelf stackers, and that aisle sold about 30% less than it normally sold in that 2-hour period where the robots were in there and they were running the trial, because human beings just felt uncomfortable going there. However, self-service tills, we're quite happy serving ourselves. This is a form of automation. It's quicker, it's simpler. You don't have somebody potentially giving a view on what you've been buying, and you can just get on with it and get out and move on. However, we've yet to see the store manager's job being automated. So effectively the first two, these are automation, and automation is a big, big part of the change that we're seeing. Store manager, yet to be automated, albeit there are some very clever algorithms that supermarkets are starting to use around weather, around stocking. So we've probably all been into a supermarket on a nice Thursday or a Friday, and it's going to be a really sunny weekend, and you'll find that all the strawberries and the Pims and the outside barbecue stuff is right at the front of the supermarket, just waiting for you to go and pick it up. So we are seeing a transition of high skills as well as low skill being automated, but very much the high skills are becoming, let the machine do the ordinary, let the machine come up with the insights, and let the human beings use that insight to do the extraordinary. So I'm getting towards the end now, you'll be pleased to hear. I'm going to paraphrase somewhat some work, and this is my sort of my eighth scale of change, some work from the World Economic Forum about 2.5, 3 years ago. They identified 3 groups of skills of the future, and this work has absolutely survived COVID and is more relevant now than it probably ever has been. And those skills sort of boil down into 3 areas. One, it's about being a decent human being. It's about having empathy. It's about being able to engage with people well. The middle one is about, or the second one is about having an understanding of technology. You don't need to be a technologist, but you just need to have some understanding of what's going on. And the third area is about being a lifelong learner, because something like 1/3 of what we know becomes out of date every year. It doesn't follow through that therefore over 3 years everything you know is irrelevant, but 1/3 of what we know is out of date, and that has accelerated now. If you just think about 12, 18 months ago pre-COVID, probably 18 months ago pre-COVID, Zoom didn't really exist. It wasn't a verb, or the business existed, but we didn't spend the amount of time video conferencing. If somebody said to you, I'm going to engage with a lot of people over video conferencing, I'm not going to leave my home, I'm going to work from my home for a year, they'd have thought you're smoking something and going slightly mad. So I guess if I bring all this to some sort of conclusion, there's a few themes that I just wanted to talk to you about. So society is changing. What might that change in society mean for your business? For example, when we were in lockdown, everybody's business became a digital business. Whether you liked it or not, your digital footprint, and your digital footprint is more than just your website, your social media activity, that was your business to the outside world. So one of the sort of questions and challenges I'm giving to everybody at the moment is, does your website reflect what your business does and what your business is today? A lot of businesses haven't updated their website for a long period of time. And also, your website could be your best lead generation tool. Is it really there? Is it engaging with your customers in the way you want to engage? Is it encouraging people to come in and ask questions and being a very open door? Or is it much more of a, yeah, we've done it and we'll forget about it now? Excuse me. So society is changing, as I've talked about. And this change is only accelerating. I was reading some stuff earlier on this morning on a media report, which effectively said that Gen Zs don't watch TV. They want to spend all their time gaming or watch stuff on social media. That's quite a challenge for all the traditional firms that advertise on TV and for the TV manufacturers and TV production people. There is a tech revolution. The world is changing, and this change is only going to continue. It's not a once and it's done. It's just going to continue rolling. Data and insights are part of that and are going to become much more important. Consumers have also realized the value that their data has. And then there's this thing about future needs and skills. I'm not a pessimist to the extent that I think that the machines are going to go and take over everybody's jobs. What I think will happen is a lot of jobs will get impacted, and part of mundane parts of jobs, so copy and pasting data, for example, that human beings are very bad at, machines will end up doing that. The human beings will end up doing the higher value added skills, and a whole load of extra jobs will be created, similar to when the web revolution happened around 2000. You had a whole generation of extra jobs that would create a huge spark of jobs. And then you get this kind of thing about, okay, how do we interact as human beings? And it comes back to those 3 fundamentals of decent human beings, knowledge and understanding of tech, and the ability to learn will set us up well. And whilst COVID has happened, and COVID is an impact on all of this stuff, I don't think fundamentally it changes any of the things we've talked about. It's just really accelerated them. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop talking there because I'm conscious I've just fire hosed at you for about 25 minutes, and I'm going to be quiet and see if there's some Q&A.
Thanks very much, Roland. Haven't got any questions yet, but if I could pose one, almost sounds like the standard interview type question, doesn't it? This, but where do you see us in 5 years' time? Given the fact that we were, it's only about 13, 14 years ago that the iPhone arrived, and it seems to have been here forever. But 5 years' time, what will we be looking like?
So there's some slides that I could have included in here, which I didn't, around the hype cycle. So the hype cycle is a cycle around tech adoption, which effectively says when technology comes in, there's a load of positivity about it and everybody says, oh, this is amazing, but the technology isn't up to the level of hype. And then you get a trough of disillusionment where the hype is all gone, but the technology all the time is improving, and people are going, yeah, well, this technology is not quite there yet. And then it sort of picks up and technology starts to match the hype, and then eventually it becomes normal. The reason I'm saying that is because traditionally human beings tend to over exaggerate the impact of technology in the short term and under exaggerate, that's not the wrong word, and under impact, I need to find the right words for that. So they tend to over exaggerate the impact of tech in the short term and underplay the impact of tech in the medium term or in the longer term. So I think we will end up transitioning largely to some form of hybrid working model. I think we'll probably see a big return to office because people have been starved of human contact because we are sociable beings, and that will happen. And then we'll transition back to I'm not a big fan of the new normal, but we'll transition back to some sort of position where people will spend time collaborating with each other in the office, and they will spend time doing work that they need to do in isolation, probably at their home or at somewhere nearer to their local presence. And I think that will only be accelerated by some of the tech trends around data, around insights, and around just what technology can actually do for you. Because it wasn't, as you said, it wasn't very long ago that we didn't have the mobile phone. It wasn't even very long ago that we didn't have video conferencing. And now we can relatively easily engage. Certainly the sort of conversations I'm having with customers is, yeah, we quite like catching up with you once a month for 15, 20 minutes, having a quick download. Let's keep doing that. And then let's meet once every 6 months and have a more formal kind of catch up.
Great. One thing that I just wanted to add, that because it's pertinent to sort of the Wiltshire geography, is that you were talking about the human-free farming. It's quite hard to say, and new developments at Lackham College, part of Wiltshire College, is a new robotic milking parlour, which has just been installed. I don't know if it's. I'm looking at Dee here. Is that live yet, Dee, or just about? If it's not,
it's
already?
Just about. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, can I pose a question, Roland? And thank you, from an absolute technophobe, seriously, and somebody who has said far too old for this type of thing. You've made it sound really exciting. So thank you for that at the outset. But I work with a lot of what I would consider traditional manufacturing and engineering companies. And the majority of these are SMEs. We obviously have quite a number of larger companies, but a lot of the SMEs. How do you propose looking at them and identifying how they can move forward? Because again, a lot of these are the older age group, if you like, and have not come across this type of technology and opportunities before.
So thank you. You're very kind. I don't think age is really an impediment, or in some ways, age is actually helps you because you've got lots of different perspectives to look at this through. The sort of thing that I'm hearing clients. So I'm going to tell you what clients are telling me rather than me telling you, because I don't think it's my place to tell people the answer. So what clients are telling me is, and this is across not just tech, this is across high-end manufacturing, this is across all sorts of industries where technology is having an impact. The economy is becoming much more technology or tech enabled, and yes, there is a requirement to invest if you're going to go down a tech enabled route, but it will turbocharge your business and future proof it. So one of the things that a lot of clients are saying to me is, well, we're just thinking about what's our fundamental reason for being here, what's our purpose, what are we here to do, and how can we then look at that in a new way post COVID? How can we look at that in a different way post COVID? So just using that lift example that I talked about earlier on. Traditionally, you go and send and fire alarms. Actually, let's talk about fire alarms, because it's a different thing, and I've got a good story around this as well. Traditionally, fire alarms, somebody goes and services it, or have burglar alarms, goes and services it once a year. If that service or that system is monitored and there's a load of smart sensors on it, it can tell you whether somebody's in a room. It can tell you whether they're emitting carbon dioxide, so they're breathing. It can tell you whether actually it's all fine and you don't need to do anything about it. And then if you look at that sort of to the next level, and this is sort of this example will hopefully in some ways answer the question. So one of the problems that society's got at the moment is society is aging, and how do you help those people to continue to live fulfilling and enjoyable lives in their own homes rather than putting them somewhere else? One of the clients we've been working with, they used a smart plug that came from Samsung. This business does care in the community workers. that go around and effectively go into people's houses and look after them. Put a smart plug on people's kettles. Most elderly people have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee in the morning. The data from that smart plug went back to the routing system for the care workers, and it learned when people were having their cup of tea or cup of coffee. And if your granny or your grandpa hadn't had their cup of tea in the morning and in the normal period of time, it sends a text message to nearest and dearest saying, granny or grandpa haven't had their cup of tea. Are they away at the moment? Are they not at home, etc. And if that text message wasn't answered within half an hour, the system automatically scheduled the nearest care worker to go and check on them. And historically, elderly people are found within 5 to 6 hours after they've had a fall. And during this trial, people were found within an hour. If you're found within 5 or 6 hours after a fall, generally you spend, there's a direct link, 5 to 6 weeks in hospital. So really bad for the person, really expensive, not great, just generally bad. A lot of elderly people have these life tag things around their necks that their nearest and dearest give them. They don't like wearing them. You know, my mum had MS. She hated wearing hers because she felt like it was like a tag and it was bad. So this is about supporting people in an entirely different way. And I use that as an analogy to try and say, well, actually, that's an entirely different way of thinking about your business. And it's that thought of, okay, what am I here to do? How can I use technology to drive that? And there is no end of very, very simple technology that you can just go and buy off the shelf, whether it's an app, whether it's a sensor, whatever it may be, that will just help. And what I would encourage businesses to do is just think about that and talk to your staff, because the staff have all generally got the ideas, they've got the answers, and they know what the on the ground problem is. And if you don't do it, somebody else is going to go and do it to your customers, because it's really, really clear that the future is very different to the past. So very long answer to a very simple question. Hopefully it made sense.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brilliant. Right, I've got a couple of questions that have come in. Hi, Roland. This is from Callum Hiscott. I work in the logistics sector, and many countries, carriers and SMEs are finding delays with customs clearance due to such large volumes going through their networks. Could you foresee this high skill role being replaced with automation, robotics, etc., where lots of paperwork and specific terms are used?
The answer to this is around I can't say it this morning, DLT, distributed ledger technology. It gets itself a bit of a bad name because it's effectively what powers Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. This is not an HSBC advert. We're not the only people doing it, but a lot of people are using distributed ledger technology to look at how you can reformat trade, how you can deal with getting payments into the right place, how you can deal with getting clearances. There's a client that I've been doing some work with recently that does a logistics and top end supply chain management platform, and they've spent a lot of time during COVID for exactly the reasons that's been asked by the question. And thank you for the question. Good question, hard question. Looking at how do they simplify this process, because a lot of it is around dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and we've heard some brilliant examples post-Brexit of things being turned away because the descriptions weren't quite right. I think there is some stuff that machinery and technology can do around data matching that says the paper should say this, the paper says this, therefore it's a tick, but you're never going to get over the point that at some point a human being is going to have to interfere in that process or have to have input into that. So I come back to, again, this view of let the machines do the ordinary, let the machines do all the testing, all the checking, and then let the human beings come over the top of it and go, yes, that's right, that is the right way of doing it. You can fully automate that process through DLT, distributed ledger technology. I'm not sure we want to, but that potential is there.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Ian Mean, who's a colleague of mine, who's Director of Business West up in Gloucestershire. Good presentation. To some extent, we've covered this already, but how can you get this information over to SMEs?
So a couple of things. I would encourage everybody just to look at the press, look at what's going on. You don't need to go very far down some of these holes and you'll see pretty much what's going on. A bit of an HSBC plug, because it would be remiss of me not to. We're running a whole series of webinars around Tomorrow Ready, and part of that is about looking at how tech change can impact businesses, and there's a whole sort of different level of dive, some different stuff that we're talking about. All I've tried to really create here is that here's some big themes. Here's the operating environment that you're working with. The operating environment is different today than it was 24 months ago. And let's be aware that this change is going to happen to you whether you like it or not. And let's try and get on the front foot. I don't have the insight into every individual industry to go and say, well, these are the things that are going on. I'm just trying to give you some big picture signposts that people can use to think about, okay, what is going on. Great resources around. So the BBC Tech section is really good. There's a lot of really good resources on the likes of Tech Nation. And just really, if you just Google your sector and around tech change or innovation, you'll be amazed probably what comes up.
Thank you, Roland.
I'll just ask a question around that, Roland. You know, you get out and see over 200 of our clients a year. What do you see as sort of that best-in-class culture around absorbing some of this and sharing it around the team? Because I think with some SMEs and other businesses, it's that time, it's that, how do I capture this and kind of share it and build the culture in the organisation that understands the change and absorbs it and then can deliver it in the organisation?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Tom. So if I was talking probably 6 months ago, I was using a seesaw a lot, and I had a seesaw in every conversation that I was having, or every engagement I was doing. When effectively on one side of it, you had all the solid stuff around what's COVID going to mean for me, what's happening to my sales cycles, what's happening to my customers, what's happening to my suppliers. And initially, the focus was all on that end. And then on the other end, you had, okay, what does my culture look like? What's my future look like? What do my products need to look like? How do I innovate? And people pivoted from very early in COVID, spending all the time going, oh, what is my business going to look like? Have I got a business in the future? To spending all their time focused down this end around culture. I think businesses have learned that culture in a remote working environment needs to be different to culture in an office environment. If you look at the derivation of the word office, it's basically a place where people go to congregate together. That's the real definition if you go back to the sort of the derivation of the word. And I think culture needs to be different going forwards. I think staff know what they want and they know the answer, and it's about getting that answer from them, and it's about getting them to tell you what the consumers and what the customers are really saying. And I also think there's a piece from a sort of an employee and an employer and a culture piece around businesses are transitioning from a presenteeism time frame where you were seen to be in the office, you were seen to be working, you were considered to be a good egg if you were putting the hours in, to an output based. And you've also got this fantastic opportunity now where you can basically recruit people across the entire globe. You don't need to be able to recruit people that are just within 30 miles of you, and that gives some huge opportunities around diversity, around skills, around outlook. And I what I'm really seeing, one of the most pleasing things I'm seeing is customers embracing everybody in their business and going, CEO going, look, I've never been through this pandemic before, nor have we all, but collectively we all know what the answer is and we can find a way through this. So I think, to summarize all of that, it's about listening to what the customers are saying, listening to what the consumers are saying, listening to what your teams are saying, and taking a direction from them and having that good, honest, open conversation about, okay, what do we want the culture to look like? What do we want the business to look like? What's our direction of travel? How do we serve our customers better? I'm sort of tempted to put that back on you and say, does that resonate with the conversations you've had?
Yes, definitely. And I think I was failing with the tech, which is ironic. Definitely, I think we're seeing it across our client base that, how do you capture this change, the opportunity coming out of COVID, and how do you build the skills that are needed? And I think it's the skills that we're seeing are the biggest challenges, and how are people engaging with local colleges, apprenticeship, all that side of it around what are the skills needed to drive this forward. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we're seeing in terms of where do you get the right mix of people to deliver the opportunity facing into this new world.
So Pam Webb's asked a really interesting question. What does the future look like?
No, go on.
What does the future look like for checks and cash? So
can I just say that Pam is the CEO of Voluntary Action Swindon, so she deals with a lot of volunteers and a lot of, it's the inclusion side of things, and a lot of vulnerable and elderly people included. So there's a context behind that question as well.
That's helpful. So I'm a bit of a simpleton. I very much look at life through the life I've led and how I live. And I think most people do that because we're all very different products because of the lives we've led. I'm very aware that there are elements of society. So my kids still get checks from their grandparents. We then just scan them and they go into their bank account that rely on that. the volume of cash that's been traveling around the system has reduced massively during COVID. As people have found alternative ways of payment, whether that's contactless on your phone or whether that's contactless with a card. I think those trends are probably here to stay. Cash is never going to go anywhere because it's a standard way of paying people. I think we will probably see an acceleration of the existing trends. And one of the areas that I think is really interesting is the power of the grey pound, or the power of the retired element of society. And there's a much greater focus on how do you appeal to that part of society, and how do you create products and services for them, because there's a lot of value tied up there. So I think somebody will crack some sort of system or process that makes it much easier for the more mature element of society to make contactless payments, to be more comfortable with remote banking. I don't have a particular HSBC view on that, so that's very much more kind of how I see life. So Anonymous, what sector do you see as the one to be most excited about? Yeah, so I'm most excited about health tech. That's exactly right. So I think the biggest change that society has got to go through, if you look at the UK, historically, the NHS is a reactive service. It's a free at the point of use service, but it's reactive. I'm a man of a certain age. I'm very unlikely to go and visit my GP unless I'm pretty much dying or I need to have a COVID vaccination. However, as society ages, one of the problems that we've got to address is that cost to serve model doesn't work. One of my mates is a GP, and he lectures medical students 3 days a week, and he works in a general practice 2 days a week. And he reckons within 3 years, he will have the equivalent of an out of order report on his desk when he goes into the surgery in the morning saying, based off either people's own devices or NHS provided devices, you need to contact these 10 customers because they're out of their normal bounds. And that will then lead to me getting a phone call saying, Mr. Emmans, you need to come and have a conversation with me. You're about to have a heart attack if you're not careful. Then you can reduce the cost, because you societarily, personally, and the pressure on the NHS by transitioning from purely reactive, where it's quite expensive to fix people, to proactive, actually, let's do that. Some of the questions and challenges around that, around data sharing, well, let's assume at some point that gets shared, that gets solved, because there is a benefit to us for it. There's some then bigger picture questions around actually life insurance, health insurance, house insurance, kind of no end of things that come off that are relatively tricky. But fundamentally, the amount of change that's going on in the NHS, I think, is really, really exciting. There is some structural challenges around that, but I do see that being an area where we'll see most change. The other area, and I'm going to cheekily add a second area onto that, is around education. So fundamentally, people are educated today the same way they were in the 18th century, largely, rote learning, teachers standing at the front. We've seen a transition to a different way of learning through COVID. We're certainly seeing it in the corporate world with gamification and also bespoke learning. So instead of that sort of sheep dip learning, everybody learns the same thing and you get tested at the end. It's much more a case of, okay, where is your knowledge on this subject matter to start with? Let's test you through that. Let's make it a bit more iterative and interactive, and then let's get you to the right place and be able to demonstrate that. Great example of that. My son's got dyslexia, and he has historically used a number of software programs when he's at school that help him through that process and that test where his dyslexic gaps are, for want of a better phrase, and he gets very specific intervention. So you get this, instead of you transitioning learning from sheep dip, one pace for all, to different pace for different people with different bits of intervention. And I think that's potentially really, really exciting for the youth of today and for all of us.
I suppose my only sort of observation that I'd make there, especially on the education side of things, is something that's come up over the last 14 months or so, is that digital divide and the inclusion side of things. Within the I know most people have got mobile phones, etc., but there may only be one mobile phone in a household, and that's being used, or one device being used. A lot of work needs to be done by government to remove that digital divide, I would suggest.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't have a particularly strong view on that, but the stats for PC shipment Q4 last year were huge, principally driven by Chromebooks going into the education space. Chromebooks, very cut down laptops, very cheap, very simple, very effective, work all the time, going into the education sector. I think we'll see a lot more of that. Quite what that ultimately looks like and how the government addresses that, way beyond my pay grade. But you can definitely see how it could work.
Yeah. Unless there are any other questions, we're almost at close time anyway. But any other questions at all that could be quickly fired in? All from the panel. In which case, just remains to me to thank you, Roland. Hugely enlightening and insightful. Of course, we've got one question coming now. Oh, great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, just what I say, great presentation, really insightful, and the answers to the questions equally so as well. So thank you very much. Thank you also to my Business West colleagues and HSBC directors and managers to help put this together and make this possible today. Just a short trailer again, I'm just checking on the date, the 17th of June, which will be the third and final webinar in this short series with Robert King from HSBC talking about sustainability. So 17th of June at the same start time. In the meantime, thank you very much again, Roland, and have a good day, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks.